Well, it is great to have all of you with us today, and I just want to give a warm welcome to everyone across all of our campuses, those of you connecting online. My name is Chris. I'm one of the pastors here, and we're in this series titled In the Ring, Fighting for What Matters Most. And this one word is, it's this word that is just tying this whole series together, because when it comes to relationships, so many times, and I know I'm not the only one, so many times when it comes to relationships, especially relational friction, we as human beings, we're just experts in finding the faults in everyone else, and we spend so little time looking at ourselves. And so this series, we're focused on becoming who God has designed us to be, becoming who God has destined us to be, becoming the best version of ourselves that we possibly can become. And that requires us to stop looking at everyone else. If you're married, it requires you to stop looking at all the faults in your spouse and just looking at yourself. If you're dating someone, it requires you to stop looking at all the faults in the person you're dating and just focusing on yourself. And guess what? This is just good relationship advice, period. What are the broken areas within you that you need to start to work on? What are the fractured pieces that need to start being put together? What are the voids within you that you're trying to fill with other people and other things, and start focusing and say, but who do I need to become? And one of the greatest tools of becoming, is the MSC. It's a mutual submission competition. It's all about, how do I serve other people? Again, if you're married, this is marriage gold right here. How can I serve my spouse? How can I encourage my spouse? How can I lift my spouse up? If you're dating someone, this is dating gold. But again, this is just relationships. And if you're a Christ follower, no. If you've named Jesus as your Lord and Savior, if you made Jesus the subject of your life, this is non-negotiable. As Christ followers, this is how we are to live our lives in a mutual submission competition. Guess what? Jesus modeled this in the greatest way ever, to lower himself, to lift everyone up. And if you're not a Christ follower, I would just say to you, try it out. See how it will impact your marriage. See how it'll impact the person you're dating. See how it'll impact your work relationships. I'm just saying, just try it out. And I'll tell you, you'll see such a significant difference. Well, at the end of part 2 last week, we had looked at this just raw and authentic prayer from David, the mighty king, warrior king David, as he's just pouring his heart out to God. We talk about talking to God. I mean, the word is prayer, but it's like, God, this is what's going on within my heart, my soul, and my mind. And David just went there, and you could just tell all of the hurt and pain. And one of those significant parts of his prayer in Psalm 55 was a close friend, a friend he went to church with, a friend that he had done life with. And this friend hadn't just hurt David, but had hurt countless other people. In all the authenticity and rawness, as David is just pleading out to God, David brings it all down to this one last thought. He goes, but as for me, God, I trust in you. This is the essence of the mutual submission competition. When you come to the point, God, to say, God, I just trust in you. I just trust in you. That's what Peter said. God, under your mighty hand, God, I'm going to trust that you will lift me up. Well, every part of the series, I've issued a warning. And week 1 was to all of you ladies to say, hey, this one insight might feel at the beginning like it's like a left hook, but it's such an empowering and encouraging statement. Last week, I issued a warning to all of you that maybe don't believe in God, not sure about God, not sure about Jesus. I just said, try it out. It might feel super spiritual. It might feel kind of like church talk, but just try it out. It can't hurt you to try it out. Well, there's another warning for this part 3 of this series. And we shared this warning last week. You heard this warning earlier in our service. You saw signs about this warning. And this is just parents, grandparents. I'm just telling you, this is your last warning. If you have kids with you, get them out. If they're watching online with you, go have them make you breakfast. I don't know, or lunch, right? Like, it's going to just be rated PG-13. Why? Because I'm going to say this one word a whole bunch today. If you're not sure what this simple 3-letter word is, I'm sure the person sitting next to you has already figured this out. Just have them whisper. Whisper the word. Not yet. I haven't revealed this word yet, right? So parents, you still have a moment. We have awesome Kids Rock environments that we teach age-appropriate lessons to, just like this is age-appropriate, right, for adults. And so we're going to talk about, before I reveal this word, again, some of you are like in anticipation, what could that word be? There's 2 parts. The first part, I'm just going to share a framework around this word. The second part, my wife, Kim, is going to join me, and we're just going to answer some questions that we're just pretty sure all of you, most of you, are asking or wondering about, and hopefully we'll give some insights that are very practical and helpful. And so that's kind of 2 parts to our time together. But here's what I know. When it comes to church, spirituality, religion, whatever umbrella term you want to use, the conversation around sex hasn't been handled real well. It just hasn't. Maybe you grew up in a church where this word was never uttered in the church. Maybe you grew up in a house and you went to church with mom and dad, but this word was never talked about. For some of you had to discover sex and learn about sex on your own. I was raised kind of differently. My parents, just at every age range, they would sit me and my sister down and have the talk. And I was 2 years younger than my sister, so it always felt like, not yet, Mom and Dad. Like, I don't want to hear that. But what I was so thankful for, especially looking back at my childhood and my teenage years, is I didn't have to discover I didn't have to discover about sex from the bus or the playground or from my friends. Like, my parents were helping us learn about this within the guardrails that God has designed sex for. And here's the powerful thing about sex. God created it. God designed it. And think about God, creator God, right? Like, there's nothing more breath-catching than like one of those sunsets. You know, as the sun's going over the mountain ridge and the sky just turns like vibrant pinks and vibrant oranges and vibrant yellows. You know those moments where you just stand there and you're just like, wow, or you're driving and you pull over, hopefully, and you pull over and you just stare at it, right? Like, there's those moments where you see God's creation. We have this blue jay in our backyard, and I will see it come and go, and I tell you, this morning I saw the blue jay back, and the vibrant blues on this blue jay was just like, I just stood there just staring at this bird. Like, God's creation is amazing. And what we have to grasp is that God designed, God created sex. It's something beautiful and magnificent within his guardrails. And anything within God's guardrails is something so powerful. And when you take what God has designed and move it outside of his guardrails, it causes so much pain and destruction. And for some of you, this 3-letter word has created so much brokenness within you. Maybe because of your choices, or maybe because someone else's choices. And so we're just going to spend some time today talking about God's guardrails, what he designed sex to be all about, and how we can just take his creation and enjoy. Because within his guardrails, it is something amazing. The Apostle Paul was writing to a church located in the ancient Greek city of Corinth. And as he's writing to this church, it's just a gathering of people. He talks a lot about the subject matter. And so many times people think the Bible is this old ancient document that is just not practical for today. And as you're going to see here in a few moments, and maybe for you, you're just like, how can something written so many thousands of years ago be practical today? You know, culture has changed. But here's the thing, when it comes to sex, things haven't changed. It just hasn't changed. Why? Because the core part of who we are as human beings hasn't changed that much. Technology might have changed. We might now have indoor plumbing, which is yay, but right. It hasn't. And Paul's just having a very honest, open conversation around this topic of sex. Now, usually we teach from the NIV translation of the Bible. NIV is a great translation. Sometimes we'll bounce into the NLT. That's another great translation. Maybe you were raised on the King James Version, which actually is a really good translation from the ancient language, but they bring the ancient language into Old English, which makes it very difficult to understand. There's other translations, but today I want to do something very different. I wanted to there's a translation called The Message. And if you've never heard of The Message, it was written by a guy named Eugene Peterson. And Eugene was actually teaching a Bible study, a group of people, and they're going through this letter to the church located in the city of Galatia. We called it the book titled Galatians, but it's this letter to a church. And he was going through this letter and realized that people he's teaching to, well, there's just a disconnect kind of in the tone and the emotional connectivity of this ancient language being brought into the English. And so God kind of tapped him on the shoulder and said, you got to take the ancient language and just bring the tone and the emotional connectivity of the words into kind of a modern day. And that's what The Message is. And so I wanted to read these words from The Message, but I would challenge all of you. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and if you study from the NIV, read the words in the NIV or the ESV or the NLT or the New King James or the King James or whatever version you want to read from. So I challenge you to do this, but I just want to read these words because how they're worded, I think, just brings so much clarity into our modern day times, this ancient truth that is so applicable today. So Paul writes, there's more to sex than mere skin on skin. Culture screaming at us, social media screaming at us, media screaming at us, movies are screaming at us. The sex is just an action. It's like a to-do list, right? I mow the yard, pour me a glass of milk, and have sex, right? It's just part of the action list. It's just action. It's just skin on skin. Sex is as much spiritual mystery. And think about the gravity of this. Because here's the thing, whatever you believe in God or not sure about God, you probably know, you probably realize that sex is not just a physical act, that sex isn't just biology, that there's something so much deeper, emotionally deeper, spiritually deeper. And that's what Paul was saying. Paul's like, hey, it's as much a spiritual mystery as a physical fact. Paul's just saying, hey, sex isn't biology. There's a physical act to it, but there's so much more. And that's why there's so much hurt and so much pain attached to sex. He goes on and goes, as it's written in Scripture, and Paul is going back to, well, it was his Bible, the ancient Jewish Scriptures, the Old Testament. He goes, as it's written, and these words come from Genesis. He goes, the two become one. And this is at the very beginning. God created man and woman. He's like, the two will become one. They were separate, but now they're one. If you've ever been to a wedding, or if you've been married, right, you've heard these words before, right? The two becoming one. And what's interesting is Paul is going back to the ancient Jewish Scriptures, like, hey, God's design, when he created man, when he created woman, was the two to become one. And when you think about sex, right, there's not a more powerful picture of the two becoming one, not just physically, but the spiritual, emotional connection that happens. But Jesus does the same thing. Jesus does the same thing. In Mark chapter 16, Jesus goes back to Genesis, and Jesus actually says, hey, Moses wrote that the two will become one, that God brought man and woman together, and the two will become one. And Jesus goes on to say, you know what else Moses talked about in Genesis? He goes, therefore, what God has joined together. This is a powerful word, joined. It's this image of two ox being yoked together to plow the field together, to be in tandem together, to be a team together. And they have to work together. And what they can accomplish together is exponentially more than what they could do by themselves. And Jesus goes, hey, remember what God has joined together. Jesus is just saying, hey, what God has joined, let no one separate. No, let no one separate. That's the two becoming one. Paul goes on, he goes, Since we want to become spiritually one with the Master, we must not pursue the kind of sex that avoids commitment and intimacy, leaving us more lonely than ever. Some of you have been trying to fill the void inside with sex, and you know it has left you more lonely than ever. I mean, all the stats prove that. He goes on, he goes, the kind of sex that can never become one. Because sex that's just physical will leave you lonely, more lonely than ever. Because sex was designed by God for the two to become one, not just physically, but with commitment and intimacy. Paul goes on. He goes, there's a sense in which sexual sins are different from all the others. In sexual sin, we violate the sacredness of our own bodies, these bodies that were made for God-given and God-modeled love, for becoming one with another. Or didn't you realize that your body is a sacred place, a place of the Holy Spirit? We did this whole series called Powered Up, where we talked about God the Spirit. When you name Jesus as the subject of your life, God the Spirit comes to indwell within you. And don't you see that you can't live however you please, squandering what God paid such a high price for? The physical part of you is not some piece of property belonging to the spiritual part of you. God owns the whole works. Why? Because God created you with you in mind. So let people see God in and through your body. The framework around sex, God created. God created to bring husband and wife together, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It's not just biology. And within that confines, within that construct, it is magnificent. Outside of that, some of you know this, it brings so much hurt, so much brokenness, so much loneliness. And so what we wanted to do is spend some time just answering some questions, especially around that. But the framework is so important of how we're going to answer some of these questions. Well, right now, my wife, Kim's going to come out. So will you give her a very warm Tri-County Church welcome? Before we jump in, and we're going to jump in, before we jump in, there's something very, very important we must do. And this is as much for you and me. We've been married now, how many years, honey?
Wow, 22. I always forget.
Don't clap yet.
It's been so amazing, I just lose track of time.
It's 21. It will be.
Oh, shoot. It's 22 in December. Or November 22nd. Oh,
that
man.
was epic, by the way. I'm just saying this. We could just end now. I mean, this is amazing. This is amazing. Wow. I'm just sitting here. The rest of my day is going to be it's going to be great. Which maybe I should reverse. There's an agreement that I was going to have her agree to, but I think we should reverse this agreement. Don't you? So let's reverse this agreement. Anything Kim says will not be held against her when she gets home. That's great. I will not only forgive her, but I will also forget any stupid thing she might say. This is great. My love will remain unconditional. Now you need to ask me to sign it.
Will you sign it?
Yes, I will accept these terms. This worked great. Yeah.
Wow. You know, I could just leave now because I'm speechless.
When we're in
Anyone
there,
who knows me, that's rare. So wow.
I'm going to hear about this, by the way. That agreement still works for me, by the way.
All right. Well,
so here's our first question. What do you do when sex feels like a chore? Now, like if you're like, you're a week into your marriage, I'm sure like this question is foreign to you. If you've been married any length of time, this is a real question.
It is, and I think it's the reality for all of us is there's different seasons, right? The season where everything is, unicorns and cupcakes, and then the season where you're like, get away from me. And
We've never been in that season.
No, we might after I messed up our marriage date, but no, there's different seasons, and I think the biggest takeaway for us has been sex happens before the bedroom, and what I mean by that is I need my husband to do the random phone call that says, "Hey, love you, just called to tell you that." Hey, just so you know, I've got dinner taken care of tonight. I know you're really busy with this, and this. And I think there's the reality of us coming to grips with men are like Instapots.
No, that works.
Yeah, you're an Instapot. And women are like crock pots. And so I think...
Slow cooking.
That's right. Oh, wow. Anyway, there's those moments that we've got to remember that sex is created by God, as we all know. Sex is created to be wonderful, and it is also an act of worship. And I think when we take off the lenses of what society has made sex to be, and we realize that it's not just about, filling the world with babies, it's also about a connection, an intimacy that you can have with someone else who God has put you with. And when you realize that that is so important and it is an act of worship, then it no longer becomes a chore. It becomes something that you want to do. And the example for me that was given to me years and years ago was for men, sex is like drinking water. And what I mean by that is if I have a glass of water and I know my husband needs this water to survive and I'm constantly keeping it from him, I'm causing an internal dehydration for him. I'm keeping something away from him that's not just physical, but also emotional. Because when I'm keeping that water from him, what I'm telling him is, I know what you need, but I'm not going to give it to you. Because you know what? You made me mad the other day, or I'm tired, and you have no idea how much sleep I need right now, and you know what? I have a headache. And so I'm going to keep my water to myself, and I'm not going to give it to you. And I think it's when we realize that men are wired differently than we are. It's a biological fact. It's a need for them. And when we start looking at it as saying, you know what? I'm here as your partner to fulfill your needs. Now, that doesn't mean, men, that you use this when you go home and go, I'm thirsty. It doesn't work that way. Like I said, it's... Wow. It's more about making sure that you're creating that act of worship that God created it to be.
And the flip side, guys, this is truly where the mutual submission competition comes in. The more you serve your wife, I'm just telling you, like I think sometimes guys, because we are Instapots, where it's just like, yeah, now, and but you've done nothing to serve and honor and encourage and lift up your wife, and those things. I'm just telling you, that's where the mutual submission competition comes in. And the more you serve your wife, right? The more you honor your wife, the more you encourage your wife, and now something so powerful happens when that is part of it. And when Kim first shared this thought with me about the water and that idea of when you ask and I say no, it brought a framework within me. I'm a pretty confident guy, but I tell you, that piece, the thought of me asking Kim to, or hinting to Kim to, or not hinting and just, right? And if she said no, or when she says no, there's an emotional, and it's hard sometimes to find the words to it, there's an emotional tension that happens within me. And I'm not expecting her to say yes all the time. That's not the expectation. I'm just saying it's real that then I find myself, what if she says no next time? And what if she says no the following time? And what if she says no? And now, right, all of us as human beings, we're going to get our needs met somewhere. And this is why this topic is so important, to have conversations with your spouse about this. Because if you don't, whether it's about sex or if it's about the mutual submission competition. If you're not getting your needs met within your marriage, I'm just telling you, you will at some point find someone or something to meet those needs. And communication is everything to avoid that.
And I'll say this, ladies and gentlemen, God will never put in your path someone else's spouse to take your spouse's place. So communicate and make sure that you guys know where each other stands, where each other, Chris knows. Let me come home and everything be done, and I'm good to go. So
I'm leaving now to go clean the house. Good luck. Not now?
I should have had my kids stay home today.
You should have. It is PG. So this all leads to the next question. And maybe I should have said this right at the beginning. Please know, we have a very limited time to answer massive questions that have a lot of different angles to it. So I would just ask, as we make our way through some of these questions, give us some grace, because there's no way in about 15 minutes that we're going to be able to answer every facet of every question with every insight. And so we're just trying to give some big thoughts that maybe, hopefully, will help. Which leads to this next question. What guardrails did God place around sex? And I think that's such a broad question. And depending on even your denomination and how you were raised, there's been some guardrails depending on the denomination. Maybe you were raised in a denomination where there's one reason why you have like 12 siblings, right? Because the denomination kind of, are you following me? And what's interesting, if you're following me, what's interesting is that whole kind of guardrail on sex is from one verse in the Old Testament, that they pulled that verse out. And this is a danger for any church, any denomination. When you pull one verse and you make a whole theology around that one verse, and it can get really dangerous. And what's interesting is that one verse and the whole guardrail around sex that denomination put on it, it misses the point of that verse. The whole verse is that this guy didn't obey God. That was the whole point of that, not what he did. And some of you are now curious. Google it. I mean, be careful how you Google it, but Google it. But it was all about disobeying God. And God, at the end of the day, wants us to be obedient. I mean, the heartbeat of God, right? That's why David said, I trust you. God, I'm going to obey you. I know what I want to do, but God, I'm going to obey. Whatever you do, I'm following you. At the essence of the Christian journey is obedience to God. That's why the guardrails around sex is so important. It's why we started there. It's what God has designed it to be. And so what are the guardrails around sex? And really, the simplest thought that maybe we could just share with you is this. Within a marriage and within mutual consent, remember that God is a creative God. There's a whole bunch of creativity when it comes to sex that God's completely okay with, right? As long as it's between a husband and a wife that are mutually consenting to that. And I think that's so important, which comes down to communication. You two are talking together. And within that, God's a creative God. And God's like, hey, be creative. Enjoy sex together. The two becoming one. It is physical and emotional and spiritual. But there's one piece that we've heard over the years that kind of gets brought up or asked. And here's the question. Within those guardrails, is pornography okay if you're married? Some of you are asking, is pornography okay if you're not married? And we'll get to that in a moment. But that question gets asked. Like, within a marriage, like, is that okay? And this is simply, it's a filter. Jesus brought this whole idea of sexual sin down like this. He goes, if you even look at someone with lust in your eyes, you've sinned. You've committed adultery. You can't watch pornography and not lust for a person that's not your spouse, let alone someone who's not your spouse, right? But I'm just saying, you can't do that. Let me speak for every guy, ladies. And I will speak for every guy. There's not a guy on this planet that can watch pornography and not lust. period. Period. And if you're a guy right now and you're thinking, Chris, I'm the exception, come talk with me. Try to convince me. You're not going to. But try. I'll love the conversation. I'm just saying. And that's why all of a sudden you just start putting God's framework. It's like lust is a sin. And Jesus just said, if you lust, that's the same as adultery. It's the same as adultery. And here's what we know is pornography is rampant. I mean, we were reading a whole bunch this week. You know, pornography right now is a $100 billion a year industry, more than the NBA, the NFL, and Major League Baseball combined. Think about this. Parents, 25% of internet searches a day are pornography related. 80% of kids under the age of 20 have a sexual experience, whatever that looks like, before they leave high school. And here's what we know. Pornography is wrecking marriages. It's been largely a guy issue, but now the lady stats are on an ever-increasing rise as well. And I would just say, know this. If you have a spouse that's struggling with pornography, know it's an addiction. It's an addiction. And I know there's a personal side to this, right? If you have a spouse that's addicted to anything, right? There's a personal side, but also understand that pornography is an addiction. And there's a lot of help to help people. And we live in a day and age where there's a simple click of a button. You can watch and see anything. And that's why parents, for you and grandparents, it is so important for you to protect your kids. And we'll get into that in a moment. But there's a resource that I would just share with all of you. And if you go to livefree.co, it's not .com, but .co, a good friend of mine named Carl, he's really tackling the pornography issue, especially with us guys. And he had a pornography addiction, and through just courage and God's leadership. And now he's just helping guys through it. And I talked with him for over an hour this week on the phone. And if you go to livefree.co, guys, whether you have this addiction or not, I challenge you to do it. There's a 10-day kind of Bible study that will be delivered to your email box every day for 10 days. And I just challenge you, take that step. Take that step. If you have the addiction, take that step. If you don't, it's a good hedge of protection that you're going to put around yourself, your spouse, the person you're dating, and just in your life spiritually. And it's just a great tool for you.
Well, I think that leads to our next question, which is, how do I talk to my kids and students about sex? And we've always made it our mission that we wanted our kids to hear it from us. We didn't want them to hear it from social media or their friends or on the bus or at school or teachers. We wanted them to hear it and know what we believe and what we want them to value. And I will never forget picking up Kiera. She was in 4th grade, our oldest, and she's walking out to the car, and she's late getting to the car. And I said, "Dude, where you been?" And she goes, "Oh," in one breath. She gets it from her mama, talked very fast, and said, "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I forgot my violin at school, and we talked about sex today." And I went, "Oh, okay. Well, what'd you talk about? Help me." And I think that led to those moments as a parent that I'm really proud that we do. It was like, hey, let's go have coffee. Our kids have always had coffee dates with us. And it's a great time to have those conversations where you're sitting saying, hey, let's talk this through. And we want them to hear it from us. Why? Because we know that we are basing our beliefs on what the Bible says. And so many times we try to say we're trying to protect our kids and we want to train them the right way. And we also want to give them that ability to say, well, but I also don't want to be that helicopter mom or that drone mom that sits there and takes away their freedom. And I'm going to let you guys know something, that we are those parents that I don't allow, and Chris doesn't allow our kids to have certain freedoms. And that is, they have this phone at their hands. It's a smartphone. They have the world at their fingertips. What students and kids can find on this is crazy. And so our kids who are 17 and 13 have restrictions on their phones. Our kids who are 17 and 13 do not sleep with their phones in their rooms. I know, such a jerk parent. But we don't. They know at 8:30 every night their phone gets plugged into our room, and they don't touch it from 8:30 on. Now, the reason we do that is because we know what's out there on social media. We know what's available to our kids. And we're not trying to take away them having fun. Hear that. I've had a parent say, "You're taking away all their freedom." No, I'm not. I'm making sure that when they get older, they don't have the baggage that some of our students and kids are getting because they're looking at things at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night while mom and dad are asleep and they're in their room with a phone that's offering them the world. And one of the things that we do too is we're really intentional at saying these things to our kids all the time. We always make sure that they know Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the plans for you, declares the Lord." God knows what he wants from you, and God knows what he's got for you. And you know what? You are strong and courageous. You're accepted, loved, and you're chosen. You are destined to greatness, and you are a masterpiece. You are not created to be some high school boy's little moment of joy when they get to see a picture of you. It's not what God created you to be. Have more self-worth, believe in yourself. So we make sure that we talk to our kids. We make sure that we protect them on stuff like that. We tell them the truth. We tell them everything that the Bible says about sex. We tell them what culture is going to tell them about sex. And we make sure that it all aligns with that, which leads to, we also have another rule. And by the way, we're not saying that how we do it is how you should do it. We're just telling you from experience, this is what we do. We have another rule when it comes to sleepovers.
Yeah, early on, we received this advice, and it just was, those moments where you're like, that just makes sense. We know what happens within our house, and we can control that. And I use the word control on purpose. We can't control what happens at someone else's house. And so early on, we just said, to our kids, hey, if you want to have a sleepover, if you want to have friends over your house, over to our house, that's great. But we're just not going to allow you to go over to other people's house. Now, we have done that, but it's only with couples that we 100% trust both mom and dad and their decision-making around what happens within their house. I mean, we're talking 100%, and that circle is really small, and we just haven't. And there's been times where our kids haven't liked that decision. There's been times where other parents haven't liked that decision. But we're not parenting for a popularity contest. We're fine with our kids not liking us. We're fine with other kids not liking us. We're even fine with other parents not liking us. We're not parenting to be liked. We're parenting to protect our kids and what the Bible talks about, training them up in the way they should go. And at some point, we're going to let go. But we're going to let go as maturity takes hold. One of the things Kim didn't mention around social media, their phones do get plugged in, and we have all of their passwords to all of their social media accounts. And guess what we do? We look at it all. And don't we know that our kids have told their friends, don't send me anything, my mom and dad look. Yes, and that's winning for us.
And we're their friends. I am blown away at how many parents will look at me and go, my kid posted something on Instagram and oh my word. I'm like, my kids don't. You know why? Because they know I'm going to see it.
Yeah. And when they break those rules, they lose their phone. Not for a day. I mean, they lose their phone, right? Because here's the thing. Our girls know we pay for their phone. We pay for it. It's our plan, our money, our house. They don't pay for anything. So until they pay for anything in life, guess what? It's ours. And then the response is, well, I'll just get a job. I'm like, fine, get a job, but do you know how much money you owe me right now as a child? Fine, get a job, but you're going to start paying me back, right, for the last 17 years. It's mine. It's my phone, right? It's my phone. I pay for it. one day, right, maturity and all of that, and we're going to let go. I'm just telling you, we're protecting our kids. The other quick thought, and we need to move on to the next question. The next thought, and I want to focus this on dads, but moms, this applies to your sons as well. Dads, if you have a daughter, date your daughter. If your daughter receives all the love she needs from you as dad, she's not going to look for that love in the arms of another guy. Dads, love your daughter, hug your daughter, kiss your daughter. When your daughter goes through the phase of not wanting you to hug her, not wanting you to hang out with her, because both my girls have gone through that phase, I'm just telling you, keep hugging them, keep loving them, and keep dating them. If they receive that love from you as dad, I'm telling you, one of my goals as a dad was I wanted 2 daughters not to run and be boy crazy. And guess what I have successfully done? My girls are not. I mean, they like boys. They like the thought of boys. They like the thought of dating. Well, my oldest likes the thought of dating a boy.
Until she is. All right. Our next question.
Moving on.
Yeah, I'm going to save her.
The last question we have, and I know that this one is a pretty heavy question, but sexual abuse is in my past. What do I do? And I said earlier, some of your brokenness around sex is because choices you've made. And for some of you, the brokenness attached to sex isn't because of choice you made. It's because someone else's sin that has fractured and broken you in such a deep way. And so we just want to spend a few moments just sharing some thoughts. If this is you, and Kim and I talked a lot about this, the church has done such a horrible job when it comes to sexual abuse, especially within the church. And I just want you to know, if that has been your church experience, I'm so sorry that a church hurt you because they chose not to, I even hate to say didn't know how to handle, but I'll say it, but let's go back. They chose not to handle it in a loving, caring way in your life. And so I'm sorry for that. And we just want to offer some encouragement to you.
I think the biggest thing is you're a victim. And that doesn't mean you can't be victorious. I love the way Christine Kane says it, where she says, I was abused, but I am not defeated. And we want you to know that at Tri-County, we want to partner with you in that journey. The communication that maybe you haven't been able to have yet because the enemy keeps telling you that you need to keep it quiet until you're healed, or the enemy keeps telling you that no one will believe you, or the enemy tells you that you need to be majorly fearful. I want you to remember that fear doesn't come from God. Fear comes from the enemy, and he wants nothing more than for you to be miserable in the fact of what happened to you. And so we want you to know that we want to link arms with you. If you're going through this with a child, we want to be able to link arms with you and partner with you and walk you through this journey. And we want to challenge you to find someone. Find someone that you can talk to. Find someone that you can just say, hey, I just need to share something. Find that person who can help you. It's why we believe so much in life groups. It's not a marketing gimmick. It's to be able to say, so you can find that person that you can sit there and say, hey, I need to tell you something. And maybe it's a spouse who has no idea of your history. But yet if you look at the past 20 to 30, 40 years of your marriage, there's been a disconnect and he or she hasn't been able to figure out what it is. And you know that it's because of something that happened to you when you were little. And you haven't had that moment to have that conversation. Have that conversation. Make sure you're surrounding yourself with people, because remember, you are not defined by what was done to you.
God is powerful to heal even the most fractured person. I hope you know that. And here's what God knows. When we keep these things in the dark, they just fracture us more. But when we bring it into the light, there's so much healing that can happen. And so hear from us. We want to be a church to walk with you, to walk with you. There's no magical words. There's no quick fix formula. But we want to walk with you and love you in the journey. And there is healing, like Kim said. There's victory. There is victory. There is victory. Well, we have a lot more insights that we're just running out of time for. And so what we're going to do is we're going to record a video later, and we're just going to share all of these other insights that we have written down. We're just going to post that on social media. And again, hopefully these are just some insights that will help guide, not to solve every issue around this or bring insights to every component of this, but so we're going to put that on social media, and hopefully this will just generate a conversation. And next week will be part 4 of the series. I'm going to finish out the series. And if you are married, I'm just going to answer this question. Do you want your marriage to go the distance? And we were in counseling one time, not really marriage counseling. It was about another issue that, everything impacts relationships. But John Walker, he asked us this question, how do you see your life ending? And I'll never forget this moment, because I looked at Kim, I'm like, I see our life ending, like this would be my perfect ending, is Kim and I sitting on a porch swing somewhere together. I'm like 50 pounds overweight and wrinkly, but I don't care at that point. And I'm sitting next to Kim, and we're watching our kids and our grandkids and hopefully our great-grandkids, and the sun's setting, and I get to look at my wife and say, you know what? Not the perfect husband, but I loved you with all of me, and I love my kids with all of me. And in that moment, God can just take me home. Like that would be the perfect ending of my life. Just say, God, I did everything I could to be the dad, the husband you've called me to be. And there's a great framework to have not a perfect marriage, but a pursuit to have a marriage that goes the distance. And so that would be part 4 next week. So I hope you all come back for that.